Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Live It Up, the show where we explore and discuss how to take your life to that next level and beyond. We cover health, wealth, relationships, and how to create a life that feels good. Because after all, that's what we want. We want to feel good. I'm your host and coach, Fletcher Ellingson. Today on the show, we're going to be visiting with Lisa Dowling, who is a natural resource specialist with Chelan County. And she helped launch Keep It Blue Lake Chelan. I was at Earth Day Festival in Chelan a couple of weeks ago, and I heard a couple of representatives from the Lake Chelan Research Institute and Lake Chelan Blue talking about the health of the lake and the very real current threats to the lake. And this talk helped me realize that I've been taking the health of the lake and the clarity of that beautiful water for granted. And I thought maybe other people have too. What I heard really made me think, and I suddenly had all sorts of questions. Who's watching out for the health of this incredible body of water that we appreciate so much, that gives so much to us? How do we actively take care of it? How do we protect it and ensure that it continues to thrive, and so we can continue to derive all the value that it provides to our value? So I thought to myself, I want to learn more, and I want you to hear this important conversation too, which is why Lisa is on the show today. But before we get to that, I do want to remind you that if you have questions you would like us to answer on or off the air, email those directly to me at fletcher@fletcherellingson.com. And you can also visit me at my website, fletcherellingson.com, where I've got all sorts of free resources there. You don't have to figure this thing called life out all on your own. There are answers and solutions and ways to get unstuck and move forward powerfully. Now, at this point in the show, we usually take time to answer an email question and offer some coaching, but today I really want to skip that part because I want to give time to our conversation with Lisa. So we're going to take a short commercial break and then we'll be right back. Stay with us. Hey everybody, welcome back to Live It Up. So glad you're here, so glad you're in this conversation. As you know, I think this is a very important conversation because we're talking about cool things that are happening around the community. We're interviewing cool people that are doing cool things around the community. So today on the show, we've got Lisa Dowling. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Fletcher.
Yeah, and so you are a natural resource specialist with Chelan County.
That is correct.
And we're going to talk about Lake Chelan because I heard you speaking at Earth Day. But before we do that, we always start with wins. So tell me something that's going well in your life, either professionally or personally.
Well, we are absolutely on the verge of launching our mobile watercraft inspection program for Lake Chelan, which I have been bird dogging that effort for the last few years, and we are really excited to see it actually happening in the next week. So very excited.
In the next week?
In the next week.
All right, so well, let's just jump into it then and tell me a little bit about that program.
I will. Well, this will kind of connect a little bit later on, but we are launching a voluntary mobile watercraft inspection program. It'll be the very first of its kind for Lake Chelan, and it's going to help us get a better understanding around watercraft usage on the lake so that we can really tailor a program specific for Lake Chelan that helps reduce the risk of spread for aquatic invasive species, which are one of the biggest threats for our lake. So yes, we're really excited to bring that program here.
And how does that look? So let's say I'm a boater and I'm out in the water and I'm coming back out after the day of boating. How does that program look?
Well, hopefully we'll snag you on your way into the lake first and foremost, because one of the main parts of watercraft inspections is just checking to make sure that watercraft users have been able to implement clean, drain, dry procedures on their boat, which helps prevent species that are not known to occur within the lake from getting in the lake, because once they're in there, it can be really tough to get them out.
Okay, so I'm about to go in. Somebody from your team says, hey, can we do an inspection on your boat?
Yes,
Is that
exactly.
basically what it is?
And sometimes it might be while you're just sitting there in line waiting to put your boat in the water, and we can come up, and it's usually less than a minute of just walking around your boat, making sure that there's no obvious plants or animal species hanging off the trailer or the boat itself, looking to see if the plugs are out or there's no pools of water within your boat, and then asking a couple questions. where was your boat in the last 30 days? That way we know if it came from an infested water body, maybe we need another minute or two to just double check and make sure it's safe. If we do find that it came from an infested water body and it's currently hosting some of these very kind of scary species, we can offer a full decontamination service for your boat, which means we can pressure wash it for you and make sure that it is totally clean before it gets in the lake.
Well, and you guys will have that available there at the where they put their boats in typically?
Yes, we will. So we'll be kind of moving around from high-use marinas, and we have 2 different mobile decontamination units that we can use should we interact with infested boats.
Got it.
But for the most part, we are unlikely to see those a lot. Most folks probably have clean boats and will just be able to fast-track their way right into the lake.
And I'm assuming you guys have extensive knowledge of where some of those other lakes are. Are there any around us?
So the good news here at Washington, in the state of Washington, is that we are kind of in this corner where we don't have a lot of these scary invasive mussels, but they are rapidly spreading throughout America. And so we do not only have knowledge of where those infested waters are, but we're connected with this larger regional network of Western aquatic invasive species managers. And so when we find out that an infested boat is coming our way, it actually pings us, lets us know, hey, this guy's coming from Lake Mead or from the Great Lakes area. We decontaminated him once, but you may want to check him again before he gets in the lake. And usually that boat owner is aware of the issue as well. We've been really encouraged by how fantastic watercraft vessel owners have been in participating in these kind of things. Yeah,
that's a really
nice.
cool use of technology, being able to identify a boat and then spread that message to other organizations like yourself, so you can keep a lookout for it.
Absolutely. We're learning more and more with these sort of things that it very much takes a village.
Yeah.
A village within our local community and a village throughout the region and throughout the nation to make sure that we're really halting the rate of spread of aquatic invasive species and other invasive species as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So let's get to, that brings up another thing that I want to get to. So what are some of the threats to Lake Chelan, which is like this incredibly pristine body of water? What are some of the threats that we want to pay attention to?
Very great question. So I'm going to take a pause and step back a minute and mention that I work to coordinate this larger group of stakeholders and decision makers that we call the Lake Chelan Watershed Planning Unit. And they have been around for many years, really decades, working hard to understand more about the risks at Lake Chelan and how we can best address those. And there's been significant changes throughout the lake in recent years, from the construction of a dam and the introduction of aquatic invasive species and significant development, and all of those impact water quality. And so we work together with Phil Long at the Lake Chelan Research Institute to be the science engine conducting long-term water quality to get a sense of that. Now, we're really fortunate at Lake Chelan because it's this very long, very deep lake. And we really kind of separate it into 2 distinct subbasins. The lower area around Chelan and Manson we call the Wapato subbasin, and then there's the larger Lucerne subbasin that is almost 3 times as long and 4 times as deep, and really contains about 92% of the total volume of water at Lake Chelan. And that is surrounded by ownership that's primarily Forest Service and National Park Service. And because of that, it really creates a protective kind of buffer for the water quality as a whole in Lake Chelan. So that's thought to be kind of the primary driver for why our water quality has been pretty stable for a long time. But that being said, we are noticing some of these changes, especially throughout the Wapato Basin, like the algae growth in and around the shore, that are thought to be kind of sentinels of long-term changes, sort of that canary in the mine. And then, like I mentioned, we do have some aquatic invasive species that are known to occur in the lake. Some of those were brought here as a food source by settlers early on. Others hitched a ride on watercrafts in recent decades. But it wasn't until really recently that we had a sense of what the extent was of those species. And we did a survey for that in 2021, and we found that There's a large amount of growth among Eurasian milfoil is one that folks probably are familiar with if they like to swim in the Columbia River. Curly leaf pondweed is another plant that's out there that's very similar. And then Asian clams, which if you've ever walked along the shores of Lake Chelan, you've probably seen these little guys.
The little ones.
These little guys,
yeah.
Totally. So those are not native to Lake Chelan. And we're still learning a lot about what their presence means in terms of lake ecology. But one thing that we have learned is that they can kind of alter the microclimate at a local scale that can make a really great habitat for some of these other invasive mussels that we don't have at Lake Chelan that we very much want to keep out of the lake.
Got it.
Yep, and those are called quagga zebra mussels. They're kind of becoming a household name in some places because once they are in a water body, they can cause really catastrophic impacts.
Yeah, I heard you talk about some of the impacts. Could you just give an example of what those types of mussels do?
Absolutely. So these guys are filter feeders. They absolutely have a feeding frenzy that cleans out all the phytoplankton and zooplankton that is the base of the food web, and then that starves out all the sport fish and minnows that feed larger fish. And then on top of that, they tend to bioaccumulate chemicals and toxins, which then can be fed on by trout and by waterfowl, which can pose a human health concern. Now, in that feeding frenzy, they're also prolific reproducers, which means that once they're in an infested water body, they can really bung up dams and irrigation intakes and other structures that help us with water conveyance. So I think they estimated when they did a study recently that if we have a quagga zebra mussel infestation in the Columbia Basin, we're looking at approximately $600 million a year just in trying to deal with the infrastructure issues alone.
That is unbelievable.
And that doesn't even factor in recreation and tourism dollars that would be lost.
Wow.
So there's a lot of at stake at the lake.
Yeah, so the work that you're doing about ensuring that watercraft are clean when they enter the lake is like really critical.
It's really critical.
Yeah.
Hugely critical. And so, we hope to eventually be able to get to a place where we can do mandatory watercraft inspections. We know that that's what's needed to really effectively reduce that risk. Chelan's fantastic in the sense that there are pinch points going into the lake that we could put off-site inspection stations in that wouldn't, increase impacts for folks that are just trying to get in the lake at the marinas. But we need to collect more data before we can launch that. And that's where the voluntary watercraft inspection program comes in.
Cool.
Yeah, it'll help us fill that gap.
Good. Great stuff. We're going to take a quick break. Okay. Stay with us. We're going to have more questions for Lisa, and I'm fascinated with this conversation. Hope you are too. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back to Live It Up. So glad you're here. We're talking with Lisa Dowling, who is a natural resource specialist with Chelan County. Great conversation. We're talking about the health and well-being of Lake Chelan, and I'm getting a clearer picture of why it's so important that we take all these precautions that you've been educating me about. And I also know that there's this thing called the citizen scientists. So this is where ordinary people get to participate and really at a very important level so they can give feedback to the scientists and let them do their thing. So tell me about the Citizen Scientist Program.
Absolutely. So we actually have a couple different emerging citizen science programs that are all connected to the Keep It Blue Lake Chelan water quality campaign. One is working in partnership with the Lake Chelan Research Institute. Phil Long was able to secure a grant through the Chelan PUD public power program to do a periphyton growth study, which is a fancy name for algae. And so he's asking that lakeshore landowners in and around the lake help him track the progression of algae growth throughout the season so that he can compile all that information and learn a little bit more about what those drivers are that are driving periphyton growth, because we want to keep it blue and it's getting increasingly more green, which is not great for our water quality. Another program that's coming down the pike is also specific to lakeshore owners, where we want to launch an early detection and monitoring program for those quagga zebra mussels we talked about. And so for that, we would have folks launch an artificial substrate off their dock that can just dangle in the water and help us detect whether or not we have quagga zebra mussels early enough to be able to do something about it before they really gain a foothold.
Oh,
so
okay.
both of those are huge. And then there's a ton of other volunteer opportunities as well. We're hoping to train a volunteer army around how we can implement watercraft inspections, as well as should a detection occur, we need to rally folks rapidly to contain that. So there's a number of ways that people can plug into the lake. We recently did a Restore the Shore event where we have volunteers come out and just pick up trash off the beach, as well as those little chunks of milfoil. Believe it or not, that's how those species spread. They break off these tiny little fragments of a plant and it washes downstream, finds a great place, settles, reproduces.
Interesting.
So picking them up is super helpful.
You know what? I've got to look that up because I'm not even sure what that would look like. Clearly, I know what garbage looks like, but I don't know that I would know what milfoil looks like. So, and that's just on the shore, you're saying?
Yep, it can just be these little pieces of plants. Those don't typically grow in the lake, and so they're the same plants that kind of tickle your toes when you're swimming down at Daroga Beach, for example, or in the Columbia River.
Yeah.
And if you see those breaking up on the shore or moving around or connected to your boat, please take them off as quick as you can.
Got it. And yeah, I know what you're talking about, Daroga Park, because don't they at times have to harvest it or?
Absolutely, and so that's where, and we're testing this at Lake Chelan. We last year tested DASH, which is called Diver Assisted Suction Harvest. So it's one of those fancy acronyms, but it is a innovative way to essentially scuba dive down and vacuum out those plants straight out of the ground. Ideally getting all of them, or the entire plant, so that it doesn't reproduce. It is fairly expensive, and because of how much of Lake Chelan is infested, about 528 acres of Lake Chelan is infested. I think they initially estimated that to be about $9.9 million to remove via DASH, but we're looking at ways that we can reduce that cost through gaining efficiencies and kind of integrating that approach with other things. There may be emerging chemicals that we could use that would kill those plants and hopefully not impact other native plants and animals. So the jury's still out on what the best management option is, but we're, again, kind of looking at some of these innovative emerging methods that we could use.
So I got a question about that. That's like a 520 acres, or I think is what you said. That's such a huge area to cover and manage. Is it feasible to do that? I mean, could you manage something like with the DASH program?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And oftentimes when you're trying to hit aquatic invasive plant or animal population, it's really the first 3 to 5 to maybe 10 years tops that you are attacking that thing with great intensity. It's unlikely that we'll ever be able to get it fully out of the lake, but the goal is to knock it back to the point where it is more manageable in the long run. So it's typically a very heavy lift in the beginning, and then it becomes more manageable over time.
And so is that type of plant something that was introduced via a boat at some point in time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It evolved over the Eurasian steppe, which is kind of that Eurasian, Russia, Siberian area.
Wow.
In fact, a lot of our invasive species come from over there because it's in a similar climate that's very close to North America, but just a little bit more harsh, which means that animals and plants that come from there are well adapted to the same type of conditions we have, but can really handle the most extreme extent of those. And so once they get into our ecosystems, boy howdy, can they just sort of gain a foothold and then outcompete our own native plants and animals for survival. So that's where we got to shift that competitive advantage back to our native plants and animals.
Yeah. And I think in some of your literature, I read that there is something like, I was shocked by this, that there's 2 million people, 2 million visitors to our lake every year.
Yes, and I bet that's increasing, especially the pandemic made it so that a lot of folks started playing outside more, maybe the ones that didn't in the past, and so we've seen a huge uptick in tourism.
Wow, that is incredible. So when you look at the impact of 2 million visitors to the lake, that's significant. And then if you look at if things in the lake are not managed properly, the how the devastating effect that could have on tourism, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's really, the work that you all are doing is like so important.
And so how do we avoid that fate at our lake?
Yes.
You know, that's a question that we've been addressing for a while, and we really understand that, you know, there's no single thing that we can do. It's really going to be an integrated approach. And so we're moving forward with what I like to call the trifecta of conservation, where it's a combination of outreach and education, monitoring and mitigation. Or in our Keep It Blue campaign, we talk about protect, educate, act. And that means protect the lake through long-term water quality monitoring and early detection efforts, educate the public around the specific things that they can do to help reduce the risk, and then act to mitigate through implementing watercraft inspection programs or working on containment measures should a detection occur, or adaptive management and corrective actions.
Got it. And all of this requires funding.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So our long-term water quality monitoring program is funded through local partners. The city of Chelan really takes up a large part of that piece of the pie, as well as the Lake Chelan Reclamation District. Chelan County also contributes to that, and Cascadia Conservation District. And we all throw money in a pot to make sure that we can implement the long-term water quality monitoring plan. In addition to that, we have a lot of private donors that donate to Keep It Blue and to LCRI, Lake Chelan Research Institute. That's what funded the DASH program, as well as a few other kind of citizen science type programs. And then my mobile voluntary watercraft inspection program is being funded through the National Park Service. And the Bureau of Reclamation has also funded large chunks of this effort along the way. And so oftentimes we're dovetailing those funders together to create kind of that larger piece of funding. And we're always in search of more funding. So it's kind of a constant effort to research, get the science, get the information, apply for grants, and then put those dollars where it counts.
Yeah. So we just need a greater visibility and more awareness around this. And so could you share with the audience, like, where can they get more information about this if this has piqued their interest? And if it's important to them and they want to make a donation, where can they do that?
Absolutely. Please come and check out our website at keepitbluelakechelan.com. And you'll find all kinds of links in there about emerging data. Our State of the Lake report is linked in there. And then there's a portal where you can become a member for our campaign. So you'll receive e-newsletters and invites to our membership party, or you can just donate and not become a member, or you can connect with us and find out about more volunteer opportunities.
Excellent. Well said. All right. Well, that's all we've got time for today. It goes so fast, and especially when it's so interesting. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's time for you now to get out there, to be a source of contribution, be a source of inspiration. You do have something to offer this world, and I believe in you.